It's getting worse, and it's overflowing. We've always talked about the potential for this to overflow more than it has already, and that's happening this week. Welcome to Independent Americans, and welcome back to Space City, USA, Huntsville, Alabama, and the Huntsville-Madison County Veterans Memorial. I'm here today to wrap up what's been an amazing week. It's been a hot week, but we're going to keep the light coming to contrast the heat with a brand new episode. But I want to take you through this memorial. I've taken you through a lot of the NASA stuff and the space stuff, but Huntsville is also a place of tremendous service. And this memorial is called Sacrifice. It honors the men and women of my generation, Iraq and Afghanistan. It's modeled by 3 veterans of that war. And then you've got a pretty amazing fountain that I'm going to take you through. There's a big one in the middle that says courage, sacrifice, and duty. If you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be much better if you're listening. But if you're listening, you should get the full deal as well. And then it's a ring. It starts with the Revolutionary War, goes to the War of 1812, Mexican War, Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, Persian Gulf, Iraq and Afghanistan, all the way around. They're going to have to add some more for Iran. If it's going to be comprehensive, this ring may continue and eventually be closed. I hope not. But if history is an indicator, we will continue to have men and women fighting and dying in our wars around the world. It seems to never end. But in this week especially, I hope I brought you conversations that help you cut through the noise, that help you understand what's happening. Iran continues to go sideways. Now the Saudis are involved in the shooting war. Egypt's involved, and it's a mess. It's still unauthorized. It's still deeply unpopular. And we've got roughly 50,000 of America's sons and daughters in harm's way. Never forget that, because those are the people's names that end up on the walls and memorials like this. We've also still got no support from Congress, although members of the Senate are speaking up. They did that on Todd Blanche's nomination this week. They're doing it on Trump's weaponization fund that he wants to use to compensate January 6th insurrectionists, which my grandfather served in World War II. He must be rolling over in his grave if he heard about this shit. It's just such a conflict with our values and what this country is all about. But it's another reason why we need to stay vigilant. It's been a big week of shows. If you haven't gone back, check out my big conversation with Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. He may be running for president. I asked him about how he's going to appeal to independents. We talk about Trump calling him a pig at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And we talk about if he can become president, if he loses the Chicago Bears to Indiana. I also had a great conversation with Todd Achilles, who has some big breaking news. He's running for Senate in Idaho. You may remember him. He's been on the show a lot. The Democrat has dropped out of that race. So now Todd Achilles is in a head-to-head matchup against GOP incumbent Jim Risch. Todd Achilles was a tank commander. He served, like so many of these folks of all generations. Jim Risch didn't serve. And unfortunately, he's just been serving himself and his partisan masters. And it's time for him to go. So he's going to need your support. Check out that conversation. Check out our YouTube page. Check out TMI. Not too much information. The Morning Independent. Hot coffee coming in with perspective and analysis, and my podcast every morning. Go to independentamericans.us and you can subscribe for that. Be sure to follow us everywhere, support our sponsors. And I got a special media episode for you. I've been hitting it hard from a hotel room in Huntsville, taking my boy to day camp at Space Camp, trying to work and get to see a little bit of Huntsville and continue to stay ahead of all the news that's happening. It's been a hot summer, really hot here in Huntsville. But we're going to continue. I'm going to continue to try to bring you light to contrast the heat. Spread the word. Our independent movement is growing more and more by the day, thanks to support from folks like you. And this place is a reminder of how Americans can be united in times of conflict. Think about how this country was united in World War I and World War II and so many other times. We can be united again, especially, I believe, if our veterans lead the way. They know what sacrifice is all about. We know what courage and duty are all about. And those are the values that are the heartbeat of our country and the values that define this memorial. There's another one over there that's focused on World War I. And then the front of it, it says, never accept defeat. That's an American value too. Never accept defeat, no matter what the fight is. And in the fight for freedom, democracy, liberty, changing the status quo, making our democracy better, elevating leaders, never accept defeat. There will be victory. So thank you for tuning in to a big week of Independent Americans. Keep it going. Keep it sharing. I'll be back in New York next week with all new episodes and more guests. Check out these highlights from some of my media clips this week. I'll continue to be on MS Now, News Nation, CNN. Thanks to all of them for continuing to give me a voice and to give our movement a voice, because we're all in this together. We're just getting started. We never forget. And from Alabama, thank you for having me down here, everybody. Thank you to everybody in Space City who's been so kind to me and my boys. From down here in the deep South, in the hot South, I'm going to go hit Waffle House before I'm out of here. But until next time, stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant. Stay vigilant.
As we wait, want to bring in an A-plus panel for you today. News Nation contributor Lauren Wright is here in studio with me in New York. Paul Rieckhoff also joins us, the independent national security political analyst, and so does the Democratic strategist David Carlucci, who's a former New York State senator. Paul, start us off. I want to talk about the war while we have a few minutes and get into the Fauci hearing, maybe even Dulles before the president's announcement. But, you know, the attacks and the threats against military bases, the tough talk for the president, more reports of drone strikes in the region, even the last few hours. Where does this stand right now in your view?
It's getting worse, and it's overflowing. We've always talked about the potential for this to overflow more than it has already, and that's happening this week, especially with Saudi Arabia now actively engaged in the shooting war, continued threats to U.S. forces. And a reminder, you know, none of this has been authorized by Congress. It's still deeply unpopular with the American people, getting less popular by the day. So this is moving toward a worst case scenario. Gas prices are still up, diesel's still up, fertilizer's still up. But this is very far from over. And right now it's spiraling beyond our control.
To that point about popularity, Lauren, I want to pop up from our telestrator the MAGA support, the president's coalition, and how they see the war. Back in May, it was at 50%, okay, but now here we are, 37% MAGA support for the war in Iran. How about the politics surrounding this war?
The MAGA support, it's kind of a coalition between anti-war folks that are sort of isolationists, the way we used to think of J.D. Vance before this administration, and traditional Republicans who are reluctant to support the president, but know Iran is a bad actor and we need to stand up to them. So for him to have any sort of support approaching 50% is pretty good with an unpopular war. However, like Paul said, I think that will keep dropping just because of the inconsistency. I mean, I would have liked to see this tough talk much earlier with a consistent message.
The tough talk has come time after time. It gets attention because the president uses an expletive. And,
yes,
you know,
he rarely does, by the way.
Well,
well, you might know in private, but in public on camera.
In public, maybe more than past presidents, to be fair. But but he did in a Fox interview, David, where he was, and that's why this is getting all these headlines. Oh, we're going to beat the effing, S out of them. We'll be hitting them hard. They're going to get a beating. So my point is the expletive grabs people's attention, I suppose. But to me, this is a lot of what we've heard before from this president. I wonder how much action will follow here in the days to come, David.
Yeah, when you hear a president talk like that, it might get some views on social media, but it's really a sign of desperation. When have you seen a president talk like that? It's someone that's losing control. And that's the issue here. We don't have clarity, and that's the problem. The American people don't have clarity. Congress doesn't have clarity, and our allies don't as well. We were sold something in the beginning. This would be a quick, just a mission to stop the proliferation of possible nuclear weapons. But this is mission creep. We don't even really understand or know what could be a victory. We started with weapons. Now it's the Strait of Hormuz and leading us down a road that's just a foreign relations disaster. And I think this will be a case study studied by students in the future of what not to do.
I want to spend some time, if we have it, on the Fauci hearing. We'll have time during the show. But the president's coming out to talk about upgrades he wants to make. This is breaking news to Dulles Airport. All right. So we'll listen to this. And who knows? He might get questions about Fauci and or Iran, which we were just talking about.
As a builder, somebody that builds lots of big, nice projects before I got here. And we're doing some of the best in the world right now. This is all about the Dulles Airport remodeling it.
Fauci hearing, which we were about to talk about anyway. Dr. Fauci asserting his Fifth Amendment privileges more than 100 times on Capitol Hill earlier today. We have Lauren Wright, Paul Rieckhoff, and David Carlucci still with us. We were having a conversation right before we went to the president. We'll get to Dr. Fauci in a moment. And throughout the show, by the way, we'll get to some of the other things the president talked about, including AI, the Fed, and some other topics. But Lauren, on the war, I mean, it's the threats here that something big is coming. As I said before this, we've heard them before, but the president wants to reiterate this. Like, all right, we're going to hit him. I think right at the end he said something like, "All right, now we got to smack him a little bit."
Yes, and the unfortunate part is we've heard that before. And so even if there is a tremendous retaliation that's deserved for targeting our bases and targeting Americans at our bases and our troops in particular, we've heard it before. He has done these extraordinary strikes and measures before, and then he goes back to the negotiating table. And so I even think the late Lindsey Graham and his supporters and these types of Iran hawks that know they want to kill us and know they want Israel wiped off the map, they're even disappointed in these sorts of threats because they know he's just going to say, well, you need to get along with Iran.
And they know Iran knows that.
And so you don't, Iran knows that, and you go through that game theoretic back and forth, and no one knows what to expect.
This episode of Independent Americans is sponsored by Kalshi. We make predictions every single day. We talk about it on this show: politics, pop culture, the economy, the biggest stories making headlines all across America and around the world. Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, lets you trade those predictions in a live market. If you haven't checked it out, now is the time, especially around politics and the elections. Will Trump buy at least part of Greenland? If you think he'll do that before 2027 and you wager $100, it'll pay out $2,019.24. If you think it's going to be before January 20th, 2029, it's 17%. You can also pick whether or not you think the Republicans or the Democrats are going to win Congress. You can pick who you think the Democratic nominee will be, who the Republican nominee. It would be great to see if there's an independent nominee. There's a lot that you can wager on, but on Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. It's fun. And if you listen to this show, you can stay ahead of the curve. So download the Kalshi app and use the code INDEPENDENT and get up to $500 in bonus credits when you trade 25, which is pretty good. Kalshi, 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 trade on anything. 18 and older, restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Independent Americans, now is the time. Check out Kalshi.
Here's a clip, Paul, from the president. He was asked about those drone strikes I brought up to you at the top of the hour, because we have these reports, that Egypt has been hit with drone strikes. I don't think his answer was directly about that. I think he was referring to what happened in Jordan last night and the interceptions. But either way, his point was like, yeah, we're going to hit them. This is the president a short time ago.
We had 5 rockets shot going 8,500 miles an hour, and all 5 rockets were knocked down to the ground. But they nevertheless took a shot. So it's our turn. And we'll see if we get there with an agreement at some point. But we're going to hit them very hard.
All right. What do you make of that, Paul? It's our turn.
It's clear now that we can't punch our way out of this. And now you've got Egypt involved. You've got Saudi Arabia involved. And even if the U.S. pulled out right now, Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel might not, right? They'd probably have to protect their own interests here. So the overflow potential here is getting greater by the day. I've also called it a sucking chest wound for months now. Our economy, our military, our politics are all getting pulled into this black hole that is the Iran war that only he can stop. And what he's really doing is dragging down Republicans with him. I mean, if you're running in a close race for Senate, there's a development in Idaho now. The Democrat is out, so it'll be Jim Risch against independent Todd Achilles. The independent's in a really strong position to hold Risch accountable on his votes for the war, on being a blank check for this war. People don't want this war. And President Trump is still all gas, no brakes, and nothing's stopping him.
Let's talk about the Fauci hearing for a moment. And there were a number of questions, David, about that to the president today. So Dr. Fauci, of course, became the face of the COVID response. President Trump says he inherited Dr. Fauci and that he made a number of mistakes in his view. Of course, he took the fifth today over 100 times, 111 times. But one thing he did speak about, and I want to play this clip from earlier, was as he sees it, Senator Rand Paul's obsession with him and the reason he thinks he was called before the Congress today. Here's Dr. Fauci.
The only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote.
So he took the fifth. What does today mean, if anything, David?
Yeah, I mean, look, Congress should get to the bottom of this. We need to figure out what went wrong, what went right. But this hearing was more of a political witch hunt. It was a I gotcha. It was performance for the camera. And that's what Fauci's getting at, that, look, answer the questions, but is it about getting him in trouble? And I gotcha. That's what it's looking like. They're replaying the tape of what happened during COVID, but instead we need to prepare for the future. And I think that's what every American wants. They don't want this witch hunt. They don't really care who messed up. They want to make sure that we have a plan for when the next pandemic happens, we are prepared. Well, and unfortunately, our leadership is not focusing on that.
Well, I will say on the preparation front, I do think of that sometimes, Lauren, when we have a moment like this, because the reflexive attitude in political circles is that if you're on the left, you're kind of anointing Dr. Fauci as someone who could do no wrong in some cases, not everybody, of course, but on the right, you get people condemning Dr. Fauci as someone who got it wrong. Every time.
How are we supposed to get the answers if he's not answering them? I mean, he was the architect and the advisor behind a lot of these policies. And it's not controversial to say that he lied on masks and he lied on the effectiveness to prevent transmission on vaccines, about kids being out of school. I mean, I understand why Americans don't want to look back on this, and Democrats are in the lane there winning sometimes because people don't want to think about their lives being turned upside down. But we didn't need to know.
I suppose he could have said, I didn't know, or I wasn't sure.
He doesn't want to say that. That's a really, really, really bad answer.
Now, on this diary thing, Paul, we have a screen here on the tablet, Fauci's journal, the key takeaways. All right. So on the COVID precautions, let us see if this pits me against POTUS, of course, the president. On the media attention, the public adulation of me has been amazing. On advising the president, I spoke to him from a political standpoint. His chances for re-election might even be damaged. And then on the origins of COVID, I had always said that the very high likelihood that the virus originated naturally from an animal reservoir jumping to a human. That was May, by the way, of 2021. And now today, basically nothing. Just decides to take the fifth. Your takeaway, Paul.
I don't know how that COVID-19 quote concludes, but I'd like to know the rest of it. But I think the bigger issue here is that COVID was terrible. It was a national security failure. It was a health failure. And they want a scapegoat. And it's easy to put Fauci up there and beat the heck out of him, and it raises money for your fundraising base. But if we really want to be responsible and strategic about this, maybe we can look at 9/11 as an example, where they had a bipartisan commission that came together and fully investigated 9/11 and made recommendations on how we could be safer going forward. That would be a responsible way to approach this, and that would help keep us safer going forward, because we still are vulnerable, especially due to the cuts at the CDC. Hegseth said flu vaccines weren't going to be mandatory anymore. He had to walk that back. There's real questions about how vulnerable we could be to the next health threat, and having a responsible bipartisan commission together would be the way to approach it, and the way America's done it in the past. That's how we move forward.
By the way, Paul, since you brought it up, before we go, 9/11, the president was asked about Mayor Mamdani here in New York and how the victims of 9/11 might see his participation and 25th anniversary events. He sort of sidestepped it, or he said something to the effect of he understands why they might be upset. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm a 9/11 first responder. I'm deeply committed to the community. We fought for, first responders, healthcare for many years. And Mamdani's a deeply divisive figure. This is what happens when you only get 51% of the vote in the city. And there's going to be some significant pushback. I guess my biggest reflection is, the 25th anniversary should be about education. I taught a class on 9/11, and most of my students weren't born yet. We have to teach a new generation about the sacrifice and the heroism and the courage and how our country came together. And frankly, maybe all the politicians can just stay away. I've said that about other events as well. If any politician has a chance to make it divisive or radioactive, they should all stay home, and let's focus on the stories of the heroes who stepped up that day.
All right. Agreed on that front, no doubt. I wanted to bring it up because it came up, and I know your history with 9/11 as a 9/11 first responder, and then the service in the military afterwards. David, back to the Fauci stuff and the hearing for a moment. I want to dig in on your point, and I want to see what Lauren thinks of this before we break, about the future. So expand on what you were talking about there. If we're so politically divided and we get hit with another one of these things or something like it.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've seen the Fauci's response that he's very concerned that this is just a political witch hunt, that it's not about finding answers or preventing the next pandemic. It's more about getting him in trouble and scoring political points and smiling for the cameras and getting that social media viral hit. Instead, it needs to be about planning and going forward. And it's not all about Fauci. It has to be more about this. This didn't just happen in the United States. It didn't just know the political boundaries of our country. It was a global pandemic. So there's lessons to learn from who did things right, who did things wrong, and we need to examine all of that. But instead, this feels just like scoring political points. That's the problem. When you see cuts at the CDC, World Health Organization, those are obvious red flags that need to be paid attention to.
We don't have a ton of time, Lauren, but I want to go back to your point, which is that to get there, it seems to me, at least, you're saying we need the answers from someone.
Yes, I'm not sure how many central figures we can ask these questions to. I do think Fauci is one of them, and I think the questions are fair. I also know that, the COVID legislation alone dumped $6 trillion into our economy we can never get back. 5 to 10 years of learning loss on average for middle schoolers and elementary schoolers that we can't get back. We need the answers to these questions, and people's lives were turned upside down. By the way, the mistrust of vaccines, that's on Fauci. That's on organizations like the CDC who lied. That's why we have measles outbreaks and all of these, medieval diseases coming back in the country, is people do not know how to trust. They don't trust our health institutions, and they definitely don't trust public health officials.
There's a lot there. We could keep talking and follow.
I know,
which we'll
and
do
no one
later.
wants to talk about it, and I understand.
No, I think it's important to talk about it because, again, to the larger point that a bunch of people have made, something like this probably is going to happen again. So how are we going to get together and deal with it? Anyway, Lauren, thank you, as always. David and Paul, thank you. Again, more on this to come. The latest episode, by the way, of Paul's Independent Americans podcast has Governor J.B. Pritzker from Illinois. So that's on the elections. Check that out. Oh, there you go. So that's a promo that worked in real time. Lauren is going... getting off the set here, and she's going to watch Paul's podcast. Primetime programming now. Maybe you'll watch this too, Lauren. Much more.
He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue are dead and independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric and archipelago. He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.